This is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM. And we have with us today on WZRD, John Conrad, President and CEO of the Illinois Biotechnology Innovation Organization, iBIO, in Chicago. Good afternoon, John. How are you today?
Good. How are you doing? Thank you for having me on.
Could you explain a little bit, give us a little background of Illinois Biotechnology Innovation Organization? Is that a trade organization or is it a business?
Yeah, so the Illinois Biotechnology Innovation Organization, also known as iBIO, so we don't have to say the really long name, is a trade organization for the life sciences in Illinois. We represent the 88,000 jobs, primarily in the pharmaceutical and medical device fields within our state. And we focus really on what we need to do within Illinois to make Illinois a great place to start up companies and help companies grow.
And what was your background? What were you doing before you headed up the Illinois Biotechnology Innovation or iBIO?
Yeah, so I mean, I have kind of an interesting background only in the fact that after graduating from my undergrad degree, I came into the organization in early 2003, and I've always been with iBIO. So I came out with a kind of undergrad degree. I got my MBA while being with the organization, but I've always been with iBIO since it's kind of launched and kind of grown within the organization throughout the years.
So you were a college student and it was growing and then you were already involved in it? Is that what you're saying?
I came into the organization after graduating from college. Yeah, so it was my first job after college and I just kind of stuck with it, so.
Okay. What was your degree again?
So my undergrad degree is in psychology, actually with a minor in business. And then I have an MBA from Loyola as well now. So.
Okay. So were you attending class in the Rogers Park campus or were you attending class at the Lakeshore campus? Downtown?
So it was the downtown campus. Yeah, the Michigan Avenue campus, or yeah, I always get confused at how they classify it. But yeah, so the MBA school is downtown. So
okay. Then what is happening in Chicago to make Chicago have the most significant increase in bioscience venture capital funding of any major U.S. market over the past 3 years?
Yeah, so Illinois has been always home to, a large kind of pharmaceutical community. For a number of years, we've had a lot of really large biopharma companies. A lot of Japanese companies set up the US headquarters in Chicago or in Metro Chicago. And we've always been home to these really world-class research institutions. The change and why we're starting to see such a growth is that over the past couple of years, the larger companies have focused their growth kind of on the coasts. And at that same time, our research universities have really focused on creating new startup companies. And investing into the startup ecosystem. And so what's happening is that, we've always had these kind of world-class researchers, but now they're creating companies that are located in Chicago. And after you've had a number of companies start to get success, that starts to attract more investments. It's kind of a snowball effect that we're starting to see, is that we're just continuing to capitalize on previous successes. And now we're aligning resources within the community to support those startups. That's building out infrastructure, so wet lab space for those companies to go into, and doing other programs like helping provide proof of concept funding for those companies and aligning other resources within our industry to support those startups. All of that is just kind of fueling this kind of continued growth within our industry here in the state, and why we're seeing more venture capital investment, because venture capital firms are starting to see the promise that our industry here in Illinois provides. And really, in reality, the majority of venture capital is focused on the coasts, but the coasts are kind of oversaturated right now. So Illinois provides a great opportunity for new kind of talent for venture capitalists to invest in.
The coasts are saturated with these type of firms, or with the talent? What are you saturated with?
And so it's oversaturated just in the number of companies on the coasts. They're kind of picked over. So venture capitalists, once they don't want to invest into a company that's kind of oversubscribed. They want to be kind of a big investor, and they'll get more kind of return if they're the big investor in one company, as opposed to, having to pay smaller amounts for smaller companies or for more companies.
So in other words, they want to invest in new startup companies, and the new startup companies would gravitate to the Midwest and Chicago, especially because there's less competition here than the two coasts, is what you're saying?
Well, we do see companies moving into Illinois, especially over the past year, because it's cheaper to do business in Illinois. Our price per square foot for labs is less. We have a more stable employment market than they do on the coasts. But the point on the venture capitalists is just that, if they can be the lead investor in a company and there's not as many venture capital investors joining them in that round, they get a bigger return. So it's just they're identifying an unknown quantity to other companies, and if that unknown, delivers for them, they're going to get a bigger return than they would if they invest into a company that everybody else is investing into. So
got it. Could you give us an idea about the price per square foot of lab space, did you say, over here versus the coast?
Yeah, so I mean, recently Illinois, just in the past, since 2020, really, we either have built out or have under construction just over 1 million square feet of Class A wet lab space. So this is, state-of-the-art wet labs that haven't really existed in our state before. And so taking a building that you have here, which we have one right now located in Fulton Market, they're going to be adding some up in Lincoln Yards as well. But if you just compare that building to what it would be, or what you would pay in that building compared to what you would pay on the coasts, you're paying about 50% less in Illinois.
Could you give us a little idea? Because listeners might really be interested in how much per square feet lab space versus maybe something else that they might be paying for. If you have the numbers, if you don't, that's fine.
Yeah, it would take me a second to pull up the exact numbers for you. But you really be challenging my organization of my files here, but let me see.
Meanwhile, while you're pulling that up, if you could multitask, are the venture capitalists the Japanese firms that are moving here, or are they venture capitalists separate from the Japanese firms that are moving here?
So there are two. I mean, there are multiple kinds of venture capitalists. You have independent venture capitalists, which are not necessarily related to the industry, and they're going to be interested in investing in what they think provides them with the best return for their investors, right? And so those companies are primarily located on the coasts. We do have a couple in Illinois, but none of them really kind of focus on kind of biopharma. And so the other kind that you have is you do have corporate venture capital. And corporate venture capital can come out of large biopharma companies, AbbVie, Takeda, Astellas. A lot of these companies have corporate venture capital arms within their organizations. Those companies strategically invest in companies, in startup companies, not only for a return, but they may have an additional kind of interest in, either acquiring that drug that's in development or partnering with that startup to help sell that drug. And so you have those two kind of main types of venture capitalists. Now, both of them are kind of focused on the coasts, but what we're starting to see is a little bit more of that interest happening here in the Midwest. So.
And it's on account of a lot of talent being here. Is it on account of our universities having more of the preparing their students better for work in the biosciences industry, or is it just on account of Chicago being a metro area that is just not on the coast?
I think, so we're seeing the increase because we do have top corporate talent coming out of kind of the larger companies. We do have amazing researchers in our state who are training postdocs. And so you have really high level scientific talent coming out of our universities. And all of that is kind of a perfect mix to attract kind of investment. So.
Would you say that that community is more focused on the whole? Are there more people on the business side that are focusing on profits, or are there more researchers on the science side focusing on cures for various human ailments?
Well, I would say that, within a company, the whole organization is focused on providing drugs and relief for patients across the board. So it doesn't matter if you're a scientist or if you're a business person, that's always the company's kind of number one goal. When you look at how our labor market in Illinois is compared to a labor market, let's say in Boston, Cambridge, Boston, Cambridge has a higher percentage of R&D focused workforce. So they have more kind of scientific related people working in Boston, Cambridge than the percentage that we have in Illinois. So we tend to have more kind of corporate operations within the state. But that's where we're starting to see that kind of change, because with the growth of the startups, that's growing the R&D labor market within Illinois. So.
What are your duties as president and CEO of iBIO? And yes.
Yeah, so my job with the organization really is to focus on making sure that we're meeting and addressing the mission that we have as a company. So, our mission is to promote, connect, and engage the life sciences community to drive discovery, transform lives through groundbreaking research, and grow the Illinois economy. So really, like I said before, what I focus in on is what do we have to do to make Illinois the best ecosystem to help companies get started out of our universities? What do we need to help them grow? What do you need to do to keep them in our state? And what do we need to do to attract more companies within our state? So that's a big part of what I do, is work closely with the state of Illinois and city of Chicago on some of those issues. The other piece of what we do is we have a 501c public charity as part of our organization that's focused on STEM education, primarily addressing the inequality in our STEM education pipeline. So we run after school programs and summer camps targeting girls grades 3 through 8 in underserved communities in Illinois and now across kind of the US. So that's the kind of two kind of main focus areas that we have. So
are you a 501c6, a trade organization?
So we are a C6, but we also have a C3. So we have two. Yeah.
I didn't even know that you're allowed to have two. Is it the same organization?
It's not the same. So they're two legally separate organizations.
Got it.
Yeah. So, but we operate as
name?
one mission. One is the Illinois Biotechnology Innovation Organization. The other one is iBIO Institute.
So. And iBIO Institute is the one that is focusing on STEM?
It's focused on STEM education. Yes.
Right. So the increase of biotech firms to Illinois and all the startups, was it on account of your work, or was it organic in the whole economy?
So I think it's related. So obviously we, a few years ago in 2017, released an economic blueprint for the state of Illinois, identifying kind of the main challenges that our community is facing. We developed that blueprint because we saw the beginnings of this trend of growth. We saw that our universities were switching their operating method and looking at, investing in creating more startups. So we created our blueprint to address what we saw were going to be the main constraints, which is focused on infrastructure, and it's focused on accessing early stage capital for those companies. And then we have two more pieces, which is focused on workforce, so ensuring that we have the right educated workforce to go into those companies, and finally marketing, just because Illinois needs to do a better job of marketing itself. And so I'd say that just the number of organizations and groups came together really to make Illinois kind of successful right now. So, but we'd like to say that we did put forward a blueprint that kind of address those key issues, and then others within the community that had the resources were able to step in and address those key kind of hurdles.
So the infrastructure that you're talking about, is that the such as the lab space, the wet labs, etc.?
That's the wet labs, yeah. So we did not, up until 2020, we did not have space for a pharmaceutical company to move into. We didn't have any accessible or rentable lab space really for a company to move into. There was some down on the south side of Chicago at IIT, but that facility was pretty much full. And so that's a main kind of constraint if you're looking to attract companies to come here, or as you have companies growing up within a university ecosystem, but finally need to move into a more graduated space, they just didn't have any place to move into. And so that infrastructure build out from 2020 up until now with that 1 million square feet really lays the groundwork for the explosive growth that we expect to see. So,
are there any co-op spaces for these startups?
So that's another main piece that we saw come together. So Trammell Crow built out Fulton Labs, which is located in Fulton Market. There'll be 2 buildings there. As part of that build out, one of the main tenants is called Portal Innovations, which is really, it's a great program. So it basically brings the hard tech of a lab and co-working space in the lab with kind of the software piece of programming and support services to help those companies. So we are seeing that built out, that kind of co-op working space for lab companies is getting built out as part of Fulton Labs. And I think we'll see that model replicated with other organizations building out in other kind of facilities. So,
is this kind of co-op space common in other parts of the U.S. and other major cities, or is this more of a unique development in the Chicago metro area?
So there are on the coast and in other major markets, you have spaces similar to this. You have groups called BioLabs, which is it's a company that builds out kind of spaces like that where startups can go in and they can rent a small kind of space to help kind of grow, and they can grow within that space. The J Labs is another example. That's a Johnson & Johnson innovation kind of piece. You see that in a number of other kind of markets. What I love about Portal Innovations and what we like to do here within our state is we did it ourselves. We didn't try to attract, when we are trying to attract these other groups to come in, but John Flavin and his group really decided to create it and build out our own model that really fits our own community here. And so that's what Portal Innovations really is. And we have a track history of doing that. It was done with 1871 on the tech side. It was done with Matter on the health tech side. And so Portal Innovations is just kind of that continued kind of innovation and growth within Chicago to just kind of do it ourselves and forge our own path. So,
first of all, could you explain to our audience what a wet lab is? Is there any dry lab, or is it just wet lab?
So wet lab, yeah. So wet lab is really lab space that is created for kind of a pharmaceutical or medical device, or pharmaceutical or biopharma type of company. And so it's specifically built for the development of those drugs or those therapies. Dry lab is a space that like a med tech company can go into. So you don't really it doesn't have to handle fluids. And so that's kind of the main kind of difference. So that's kind of like maker space is that kind of other kind of space. So, but wet labs is a specific type of lab that was very constrained within our state, and it has very specific regulations that it has to meet. And so it's a very expensive space to build out. So it constitutes a very big investment by these companies that are doing it. So.
And it's expensive because it has to comply with the FDA requirements. Who is the main regulatory body for a space like that?
Well, I think there are multiple different kind of regulating bodies, but it is more expensive. I think it's usually probably twice as much, just because of the different regulations. You have to have specific ceiling heights. You have to have specific HVAC for that space, and then even within the wet labs, you have different types. So you have a regular wet lab, but then maybe you need a clean room. A clean room is even more restricted than a regular wet lab, because clean room, you're really, you're controlling what is in that room, and making sure that there are no impurities that are going into the drugs that are developed in that room. So, I mean, you have different kind of levels, and it is more expensive to build out the more restrictive that it is related to regulations. So.
And another question concerning this is, you said that these like portal innovation, these spaces are unique to here versus the coast. So how are they different? How is this our spaces different?
So I mean, so we're doing it ourselves. That's the first thing. So, if you have another group like a biolabs coming in, which would be great, that's a cookie cutter type of organization. What I love about Portal, and hopefully we see with some other groups, is that it's everybody's local. It's founded by John Flavin. John built out a team of local people who know our community, know our industry, that help build it out. And so I think that's what makes ours special, is just the Midwest mentality of we'll just do it ourselves. So.
So the build out of it is catering to the startups that are going to be occupying the space, right?
Yeah, so they design, and I'm talking a lot about Portal Innovations without actually being at Portal or being from Portal Innovations. But yeah, these spaces are designed with input from companies and from people who know kind of what the needs of the companies are. So.
Got it. What are some of the milestones in the work of biotech of iBIO?
Yeah, so about, we've been around, actually December is going to be our 20-year anniversary. So it's, looking at the kind of 20 years that we've been kind of around in our current form. It was formed from two previous organizations that merged in 2001. First and foremost, hosting the International Bioconventions in Chicago. We hosted it in 2006, 2010, and 2013. Hosting those conventions where we had, hundreds of thousands of people come to Chicago for those conventions really put us on the map. A lot of people didn't think about the Midwest as being home to life sciences companies, and so that really put us on the map. And then I would say that, even just recently, just seeing the growth of this and investment into the infrastructure is a major milestone for us, because that validates, that amount of investment validates that the industry here is strong and is growing. On the policy side, we've had a number of pieces of policy working with the state that passed that I consider key milestones as well. We passed angel tax credit in 2011, so that provides tax credits to angel investors in Illinois interested in investing in Illinois startups. So that's a major kind of program that we have within our state. And earlier this year, we passed a program that creates a state matching fund for federal SBIR grants. So federal SBIR grants are proof of concept funding to create new high-tech companies from the federal or from the US. And so what we've done in Illinois is we've created a matching program that can match your state funds to those federal grants to help companies retain even more kind of funds to help them get started. So
it's double the money then, because it's
it's a 50% match. Yeah, so it adds 50% for a phase one. So if you get $100,000, the state, when the program's implemented, can match up to $50,000 of state funds for that. So, and when you're a startup and you're bootstrapping and trying to build up your team and get the company started, that $50,000 is a lot. So.
For life sciences, the angel investors, do they, for the grant programs, are they only for life sciences firms, or are they for all startups for that grant program?
They're for high-tech startups. Yeah, so it's not
Mhm.
just life sciences. So they'll invest in other kind of STEM related startup companies. So it could be something that's dealing with, you know, an energy company, let's say somebody that has a product for wind energy or solar energy. It doesn't matter. So that would be included in it. But it has to be a high-tech kind of STEM kind of company. So.
Mm-hmm. What is the name of the grant program again, in case our listeners want to dig a little deeper?
It's the Angel Investment Tax Credit Program, and it's implemented by the Illinois Department of Commerce.
Okay. Angel Investment Tax Program?
Tax Credit Program.
Tax Credit Program. And so it is a tax credit instead of an actual grant for the firm?
It's a tax credit. So it provides companies who meet the requirements can pre-qualify with the state. Investors can pre-qualify, but it provides an angel investor with a tax credit for investing in a company. So it really attracts investment in the state for this part of our industry by providing that tax credit. So
got it. Do they get is it a lot? Do they how much do they get back for their investment? Do you know offhand?
So they usually have a pocket of money, about I think it's around 10 million. And it's, I forgot the exact amount. I think it may be like 11% or something like that. So it's a sizable credit that they get back, but it is limited. So there's only limited funds to fund that credit. And I think the way the state of Illinois has done it is great, because they do prioritize minority, women-owned businesses and businesses that are in kind of more rural kind of communities. So they do make sure that this is equitably distributed throughout the state. So.
And it's only $10 million in the fund then, is right?
Only 10 million every year. Yeah. Oh. So every year. Yeah.
Do you know if it maxes out every year?
It does max out every year. So, and it usually goes very quickly. So they've had to start to piece it up. But yeah, it is utilized heavily within the state.
So that means that some people that apply, if they apply too late, then they won't be able to get it.
Investors who apply too late do not get it. Yes.
And for this year, is it expired already? Have the funds run out?
I don't, we don't implement the program, so I don't know, but
That's
historically okay. It has run out by the fourth quarter. Yeah, so.
Okay. Well, who are the most important collaborators and supporters of iBIO?
Yeah, so our biggest kind of, I would say over the past couple of years, our biggest kind of collaborator has been the major economic development institutions within our state. So Illinois Department of Commerce. We work very closely with the Department of Commerce and the governor's office on a lot of these initiatives of what do we need to do to help companies grow. We also work very closely with groups like World Business Chicago. World Business Chicago.
Okay,
so it's the economic development arm of the city of Chicago. And so we work very closely with these organizations on what do we need to do to help companies grow here. And depending on what we're focused on, we have other kind of groups that we work with as well. So if we're looking at a workforce development or apprenticeship programs for our manufacturers, we do a lot of work with the Illinois Manufacturers Association. During COVID, iBIO was the co-chair of the governor's COVID task force, along with the Illinois Manufacturers Association. That task force was made up of key industry groups in Illinois to align our industry resources to help the state of Illinois address the COVID pandemic. And so we work very closely with other organizations and with the state. And I think that those are very kind of important partnerships. We also have partnerships, obviously, with national organizations like the National Bio Organization. iBIO is a state affiliate, which means that we just have a partnership with that organization. And that's really to help provide us with resources and information. And on the same line, we have a partnership with AdvaMed, which is the national kind of group focused on medical device industry.
What
So
is it called? What is it called again? Could you spell it out for us?
it's AVMed, so AVEDMED.
Okay, Evermed.
Yep.
Okay. Well, earlier you mentioned that you work with the Illinois Department of Commerce to determine what the needs are of the startup community. So what were the findings?
So the findings of our study, and that was kind of adopted by Governor Pritzker in his economic plan for Illinois, is we needed to focus investment and work in these four kind of key areas, and that's on the infrastructure piece. Right, so creating more wet labs in the state. We needed to attract more startup capital to our state, so venture capital, but also programs like the SBIR matching, which provides early stage capital for companies, and you can put continued use of the angel tax credit in that bucket as well. And then the next two pieces, which is our next kind of phase of what we would be looking at, is workforce development. So understanding what the needs of our member companies are going to be and what their future hiring needs are going to be, and then making sure that, you know, our 2-year and 4-year programs in Illinois are aligned with that and the needs of our companies. And then finally, just promotion of the state of the industry that we have in our state, and why it's important for continued investment. So just the marketing of what's happening here in Illinois needs to be that last kind of core piece. So.
What about the World Business Chicago? What were the findings there with iBIO, the tool?
So yeah, so World Business Chicago, we work a lot on, you know, they're really focused on promotion. So trying to get companies to move to Chicago. And so they are very kind of interested in the marketing piece of that, but they are, you know, also engaged in learning more about the infrastructure needs and the workforce development needs of our community. So.
And how do you have enough talent coming out of the university systems here, or are you still? Do you have as much talent as you need for your members?
Well, we can never have too much talent. I think our industry, like every other industry, one of the main differentiators is the talent that the companies have. And we're starting to look at right now, you know, where we're kind of lacking within our state. There's always a shortage of engineers. What we're hearing about right now is that we have a shortage of obviously AI and data science, and the way that it is being incorporated by our companies is growing. And there's a shortage of those kind of employees. So getting more data science people in, life sciences focused data science people into our companies, we're having a hard time doing that. And I think that's across the board. And just related to COVID, we're hearing that there's a nursing shortage within our industry as well. So a lot of our companies utilize nurses to work directly with patients. So patients may call in and they have questions. They're usually talking with a nurse when they do that. We're having a hard time attracting nurses to work in our industry because they are, you know, obviously with COVID have been in the provider kind of arena. So they're getting a lot of benefits and a lot of incentives to go work at a hospital or at a clinic right now. And so they're leaving our industry because they're getting paid more right now to go work there because they're getting big bonuses and everything. So, there's been historically a shortage of nurses anyways, so.
So what do the nurses do in your industry when you're developing drugs and then they're taking care of the patients that might be experimenting, being you know, are the first users of the drugs? How are the nurses being used in your industry versus the hospitals?
So they're used in a lot of different kind of ways. The way I referenced was that a lot of companies will employ nurses. So if a patient calls in and they have a question about the drug, or if they have a question about getting access to the drug, a lot of times they'll talk to a nurse just because, you know, you want somebody to have a medical background that they're talking with. And so that's where we're hearing that there's currently kind of a sort of shortage. So
well, so there are a lot of calls to nurses from patients then.
Well, I mean, it's it's incumbent on our member companies to engage with the
Mhm.
patient community, and so they have to have the resources. We have to make sure we have the
Got
resources
it.
to serve the patients that they're providing therapies for.
Got
So
it. Got it. So these nurses are available to work from home then if they're going to be uh, answering patient questions, etc. Right?
I couldn't answer that question.
That's okay.
You know, it could be possible. It is probably possible. Like they don't have to be in a clinical setting. So it's more of a business setting than a clinical setting. So it's not like they're seeing patients or anything. So they are working in an office. So
I
either a
got it.
home office or an office at a company. So
Oh, okay.
yeah.
That is interesting because um, maybe there are nurses out there that would, because of what you stated here, they might be interested in that line of work as well.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Mhm.
Which organizations and who oppose the work of the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, iBIO, and why?
I think that's a really important question. And I think it's kind of deeper than what a lot of people would think. So um, our healthcare ecosystem should be aligned with one goal, right? And that is to provide patients with the best care possible. But in reality, the answer to your question is honestly right now politics. Politics is the biggest roadblock that we're facing because it's creating walls in our healthcare ecosystem, and it pits payers, so healthcare, our health insurance companies against providers, so hospitals, clinics against industry like our pharma companies, and patients. So politics is basically pitting all of these pieces of the healthcare industry against each other.
Mm,
And so, you know, that's really what we see as our biggest kind of opposition to our organization, and to our kind of our member companies and, you know, members of other kind of pieces of the healthcare ecosystem. So
So you did mention in your article for Crane Chicago Business that there are ways for lawmakers to bridge these gaps. So what are some of the ideas for legislation to to balance drug prices versus uh, a thriving industry that is able to continue with the R&D and provide medicines for patients.
mhm. So I mean, what you're seeing now, and why I reference politics is because over what we've seen is this kind of vilification of the pharmaceutical industry,
Mhm.
and to say that the pharmaceutical industry basically has evil and corrupt intentions of just wanting to make money, and what we need to do is rein in those companies. Um, and you can run any number of polls that you want to run, asking people, do you think pharmaceutical prices are too high? I mean, everybody's going to say a pharmaceutical is too high because nobody really wants to have to take a drug. That question is always going to be, you know, it's too high. Um, but what you need to understand is not that it's that this person or your constituent is telling you it's too high. What you need to understand is, why are they saying that to me? So why is this person, or why are people saying that pharmaceuticals are too high? Why are they paying too much at the pharmacy counter? You know, are they saying it because they've heard it in the news, and they just are echoing what they're hearing? Are they saying it because they've gone to the pharmacy and they've been getting a prescription for a number of years, but suddenly that prescription has moved up in the kind of in the in the reimbursement amount? So if they're in a tiered system, maybe, you know, it was like a lower cost drug for a number of years, but now it's more costly in their kind of tier system, so they're paying more for it. Maybe it's been dropped by their formulary, so maybe it's no longer covered by their insurance. Maybe their insurance has completely changed and they've gone from a tiered kind of reimbursement system for their prescriptions, and now they have a co-insurance where they have to meet an annual deductible, instead of paying like a 10, 15, $30 copay. They're paying the price of the drug until they hit $2,000. And so what's important is you really have to understand why patients are saying, or somebody is saying, that the cost of drugs is too much, um, to actually address the problem that's at hand. And so there are, there are policies that that exist that address this. First and foremost, capping out of pocket for patients at the pharmacy counter is one way to do it. So patients don't pay any more than $2,000 at the pharmacy counter. Smoothing their out-of-pocket costs if they have a big deductible, allowing them to pay that, across 12 months instead of having to pay that if they have one big kind of prescription cost at the beginning of the year. Another piece that pharmaceutical companies have stepped in to try to help is that specifically with the co-insurance model where the patients are paying the cost of the drug until they hit that kind of deductible amount, is pharmaceutical companies have started providing patients with coupons that help offset the cost of the drugs at the pharmacy counter. But what we need to do is ensuring that health insurers count those coupons to the deductible. So if you're paying for a $100 drug and that drug company is going to give you, let's say, a $20 coupon, you want that $20 to count towards your deductible. Health insurance plans are trying to keep that coupon from counting towards your deductible. So there's actually a bill filed, and Congressman Rodney Davis is one of the chief co-sponsors on it, that says that all forms of payment for a drug, including coupons, have to count towards the deductible for the patient. And so those are some key kind of simple things that can be done that really reduce the price of the drug for patients at the pharmacy counter.
Mhm. So they want to put it apply it for the deductible. Right now, if the coupon, if they use the coupon, where is it applied?
So it saves the patient would pay less for that, but it doesn't apply towards the deductible. So you get you're paying, let's say you have to pay $100 for the drug, and you get a $20 coupon. So you've only paid $80. But you've also only reduced your deductible by $80, not the full $100. So they don't apply that $20 to the amount that you've paid off the deductible, if that makes sense.
Okay,
so I mean, the cash you spend is $20 less, but you still have that full amount to make up still.
Mhm.
So
and then you have to eventually you still have to pay that full $2,000 deductible. It still keeps on accumulating, but if it were applied to the deductible, then the patient would be able to pay less deductible.
Yes, you'd be essentially, the patient would be paying less deductible. That would be paid basically by the company's coupons. So
got it. And who was it? How did it come about that the coupon is applied to the principal instead of the deductible?
So, I mean, the program was created in response to the kind of co-insurance plan that you get with high deductible plans. So companies started providing those coupons to help ease patients' costs, but it's only been in the past couple of years that we've seen health insurers start to invalidate the use of those coupons towards the deductible. So,
and why would they do that?
Because they get more money if they don't, to be honest. So,
well, if the coupon is applied, if they are able to cash out the coupon, how is it that they're getting less money?
But they would get more money if they took the coupon and made you meet that deductible without the use of a coupon, though. So they make more money by not counting the coupon towards their deductible. So
okay. So if they get the coupon, they're not able to cash out get cash for the coupon. They're just able to they have to just reduce the price of the drug. That's it. And then so they're getting less for the drug, but they want it that way so that they'll still get the deductible.
They get, I would say they get more if they don't count the coupon towards the deductible, and that's what they're focused on, is getting more. Is not necessarily, so I mean, they're a business, they're focused on capitalizing and making money. They actually, when you look at the largest kind of companies. If you look at the Fortune 50, it is made up of health insurance companies and is made up of PBMs, and so that they align their products and their offerings to drive money in those resources. So
PB what? They're also
pharmaceutical benefit managers. So it's these are companies that are, we could go really deep, but these are companies that are hired by health insurance plans to negotiate the reimbursement rates and develop the formularies for healthcare plans, pharmaceutical offerings. So basically, health insurer contracts with the PBM, which there's only 3 PBMs, or there are 3 PBMs that account for 75% of the industry, and so those groups drive rebates from pharmaceutical companies to try to build formularies and save health insurers money, but in essence, it creates it's created new companies and new kind of monopolistic organizations that act as middlemen. So, but I mean, I think our whole focus right now needs to be not pointing fingers at different parts of our ecosystem and really saying, you know, instead of pushing on one piece of the ecosystem, what we need is to have somebody address this problem by bringing everybody together. So
yes, of course. That's the theme of my show today, compromise.
Okay.
And, by the way, so HR3, does I did read a summary of HR3 over the year. I did not really notice anything in HR3 that addresses the insurance agent industry. Does it? Is there anything in HR3 that addresses the insurance industry?
So HR3 was a group of policies that was passed last year, and then was brought back in the House of Representatives this year as a means to reduce the cost of drugs for Medicare patients. That program was negotiated and was built into the Build Back Better bill. And so HR3 became Build Back Better, which really is focused on paying for the infrastructure plan that was just passed by Congress. So what we could say HR3 is that it has kind of 3 main, let's say, components. The first is that it claims that that it provides negotiations for Part B and Part D drugs for Medicare. And I think it's important to say that I did air quotes around negotiations on that because it builds in a 95% excise tax for companies that choose not to negotiate. It also sets a price ceiling for those negotiations. So it's not a negotiation if you force somebody to negotiate and you already dictate what that price is going to be. That's just a price setting policy, and that's essentially what it does. The other piece, which I think is important, and it does kind of address some of the challenges that patients have seen, is that out-of-pocket cap. So it does provide an out-of-pocket cap of $2,000. So patients will never pay more than $2,000 at Medicare patients won't pay more than $2,000 at the pharmacy counter in the year. And I think that's an important piece of that. And it also provides the smoothing, as I said before. So if you have a big kind of bill at the beginning of the year, you can stretch that out across the year instead of having to pay that full deductible at the beginning of the year as well.
So right now the cap for deductible is $2,000. Before, how much would they have to pay on the average, and how high could it have gone?
So the bill hasn't passed. So Build Back Better was passed by the House. It's going to get picked up by the Senate at some point. Out-of-pocket cap is a popular kind of bill. We've seen it at the state level before in Illinois and other states. And it really focuses on that high deductible plan, specifically plans that force a co-insurance to keep that at $2,000. So, I mean, you may have a high deductible plan that has a $4,000 deductible. So you're having to meet $4,000. So this just caps it basically at the $2,000.
Mm.
So, I mean, yeah, so it just kind of level sets that at a more acceptable kind of reimbursement level. So.
Mhm. And I guess let's clarify, is HR3 in effect or not yet?
HR3 is not in effect.
Mm.
So there was a lot of negotiation around it. They
Mhm.
tried to pass HR3. They didn't have the votes to pass it because a lot of moderate members were concerned about its impact on innovation, specifically price setting and utilizing 95% excise tax to force companies into negotiating. A lot of members didn't like that. So they didn't have the votes to pass it. And so they went through some negotiations, and just a few weeks ago, they were able to come to a compromise, which still is not a good compromise for industry because it fully puts it on industry's shoulders. And once again, it's still not negotiating because they're still leveraging an excise tax. But that did pass out of the House of Representatives as part of the Build Back Better program. So it's passed out of the House. It goes to the Senate then to get picked up. But when that's going to happen, it's kind of hard to tell because I think there are a number of other issues the Senate's kind of focused on, like making sure that the federal government doesn't shut down providing funding for the federal government. There are a number of things they have to do before the end of the year. So it may not get picked up until next year in the Senate. So, and then if the Senate makes changes, then it has to go back to the House. So yeah.
For reconciliation, you mean?
Yep, for reconciliation. Yep.
How much profit does a biotech make for, let's say, a dose of a novel drug now? And what is the return for a venture capitalist investing in the biotech? Let's just break it down into simple terms, if possible.
I think it's a little bit hard to do, just because you have so many companies that do it differently. So I think what you look at it is from drug discovery through the FDA approval, developing a new medicine takes on average 10 to 15 years and costs $2.6 billion. So that's for one drug coming to market. For that drug, less than 12% of medicines that make it to phase 1 clinical trial actually make it to market. So it's extremely risky just because so few medications make it to market, and it costs so much money to take a drug from research to the patient, $2.6 billion. And so that, what I have to keep in mind is when a company decides to set a price for a drug, there are a lot of factors that go into that. One of those factors is, you have to pay for every drug that didn't make it to market. So, just because you didn't have a drug that may have failed in phase 3, you still have to pay, you still paid all that money. You still have to support that organization, the research for future. So every drug has to make sure that it's paying for every failed drug and it's paying for future innovations. And then, it has to be affordable for patients, and it has to support, a number of kind of other groups. So, if a company sets a drug, their wholesale price may be, let's say $100. That company, pays rebates. So the company's net price is a lot smaller, what they get back for that drug. So they're probably only getting about 50% of what they market the drug as. So if they are paying $100, they're usually paying up to $50 in rebates to PBMs, to healthcare plans, or it's getting negotiated down with pharmaceutical distributors. So the company only ends up, making probably 50% of what their wholesale price is actually set. So I think it's an important kind of distinction. And also that price that you often hear, that wholesale price, is not what patients pay at the counter. They're paying a negotiated price that's usually, like I said, quite a bit less than what that wholesale price is. So.
Now, what about the venture capitalist? When does that person get a return?
So they usually get a return when a company does two things. Or those three things. When a company fails, they don't get a return if the company fails. They've lost their investment. But keeping in mind, this is highly risky, with only 12% of candidates making it through. They make a return if the company goes public or if it's acquired. So if a company, a lot of times what happens is in our industry, 80% of our companies are startups or growth stage companies. They really specialize on R&D, so creating drugs and bringing them to the point of the clinical trials. And usually when a company gets to the point of a phase 2 clinical trial, the amount of investment for that phase 3 necessitates either an IPO to raise the funds for it, or being acquired by a larger company who has the knowledge and ability and resources to take it through phase 3 clinical trial, and then also to market it as well. So the venture capital, that's when they make their money. So they're looking at that return of either going public or being acquired by another company. So
do you have any idea about how foreign countries address this problem? How their pharmaceuticals address the 88% of drugs that do not make it to market, and how, if their prices are low compared to the United States, what's in place in their countries versus ours that maybe we could learn from them, or it's not applicable?
So it's not. So when you look at where our drugs come from, the research is done and drugs are created really in the U.S. U.S. is where the biopharma industry lives for the most part. There are international companies, but when you're looking at the research, that's over the vast majority of that is happening within the U.S. And so you really don't see that happening in other countries. And I know what's popular is to look at what patients pay in the US versus what patients pay in other countries. And there are a couple of things to keep in mind around that. First off, the study that was used and is often cited when you're talking about what patients pay, they like to say that patients are paying 7 times more in the US than they're paying in Europe. That study actually states that they don't actually know exactly what patients are paying in the US, because the way our system is set up, that patients are paying, the net price that patients pay is not necessarily public knowledge. And so they estimated the price that patients pay in the US. So that's an estimation of that amount. But what you do see in other countries is that you do have their governments acting as a single payer for their patient population. And that's often pointed to as something that the US should do. Keep in mind that in Europe and in Canada, where this is the case, those systems provide far fewer medications to their patients than the US does in our current healthcare system. So you have access to only, let's say, 60% of pharmaceutical drugs in a kind of dictated government said piece, because companies just won't be able to make the return by selling into those markets. In the US covers about 90% or a little over 90% available drugs. And so what you're seeing is that healthcare, you have access to more drugs in the US because we have a more kind of robust offering, and we provide flexibility in our reimbursement system, as opposed to a country where you have a single payer system where they just set the price for the drugs. And so, and that comes through if you look at, there are studies now that look at kind of cancer survival rates. Cancer survival rates in the US are higher than they are in some countries in Europe, because we do provide access to more medications. And it's also important to focus on cost of drugs as part of total healthcare spend. So in the US, it's 14%. So 14% of our total healthcare spend is made up of pharmaceutical drugs. And that's been the case for a large number of years, 5-10 years. It's stayed relatively the same. And the same is true if you look in Europe and if you look in other countries, that percentage is pretty much the same. It's the average global percentage of pharmaceutical costs as part of total healthcare costs is 15%. US is 14%. So it's really, I mean, when you look at total healthcare spend, it's a very small piece of our total healthcare spend, only 14%. And that's held true in other countries. So,
do you know what the other 86% of for the healthcare spend?
Yes. The other 86% is primarily made up of, I have it here. So roughly, a little over 40% is hospitals, about 20% is physicians. And then you get into like nursing homes, home health accounts for a large amount of it. And so that's kind of the breakup of total healthcare spend. So I mean, the majority of it really is hospitals and physicians. So
Right. Okay. So you mentioned that cancer drugs, the cancer therapies are more effective in the U.S. because there's more of them, and they could address more different cancers. But do you have any idea of the lifespan of, let's say, is it Europe and where else, and versus the U.S., Canada?
yeah, so I mean, basically in the U.S., if we're provided access to really the newest and most innovative drugs, and those drugs are increasingly focused on actually curing, as opposed to just kind of treating. And so, what they've started to see is that survival rates for many types are significantly higher in the U.S. versus patients in the U.K. Primarily because the other healthcare systems restrict access to those kind of new therapies.
Do you know offhand what drugs are actually curing instead of just addressing symptoms? Just name like 1 to 3 if you have them.
Well, I mean, this is where you're starting to see a lot of the innovation around immunotherapies. And so these are classes of drugs that are available. Immunotherapies are really kind of addressing these kind of issues. So that's where we're starting to see just kind of a change in what we're able to offer here. So
this is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM, and we have with us on Wizard John Conrad of iBIO, Illinois Biotechnology Innovation Organization in Chicago. So John, then a follow-up question about the profit side is how much profit would a novel drug make if the HR 3 95% excise tax were to take effect? Would it be no profit at all? And how much would the return become for the venture capitalist investing in the biotech?
yeah, so I mean, the 95% excise tax is really put in place to make sure that if the company doesn't negotiate, that it's not financially possible for that drug to be sold. And so basically the company would not be making money on that drug if that tax was levied against them. And so you have to keep in mind that this is an ecosystem. And so, you may be thinking, well, that doesn't hurt my feelings if it's a big pharma company and they can't make the money, or they have to take slightly less money. It kind of reverberates across the whole ecosystem, because venture capitalists invest in what they think can make their investors money. And so, at a very high risk industry like the biopharma industry, there has to be a high reward to match that high risk. If that return is going to be compromised by an excise tax or by forced kind of price setting by the government, then that reduces the return that those venture capitalists can make. And it will force them to look to other industries where they can make the kind of returns that they need to make to support the investors in their companies. And so we saw earlier this year a letter from the top venture capital firms, a number of them in Chicago, signed on to the letter voicing their concern, basically stating that, if these kind of excise taxes and price setting pieces are put in place, it's really going to force them to look to other industries to make sure that they're making the return for their investment partners. And that kind of concerns, us, because that is a vital piece and really vital for our smaller member companies to bring their drugs to market. So,
so if it would not only be affecting this ecosystem, it would even affect the ecosystems on the coast as well, so the bioscience ecosystems on the coast as well.
Yeah. So I mean, basically, yeah, it would impact the systems on the coast, but essentially, what would happen is, since the majority of the venture capital firms are focused on the coasts, they would cut kind of what they would see as more high risk. So they would stick to probably more investments on the coasts, and we would see a disproportional drop in Chicago from what they're seeing in the coasts, if that makes sense, because they're going to be focused on where the traditional R&D centers are then for the industry. So
wouldn't what you're saying is that the traditional R&D centers are already in place, and that there's less capital that needs to be put into it. There's less expenditure, so there's more of a return on investment. Whereas in Illinois and in Chicago, there has to be more investment, and if that investment is canceled out by that 95% excise tax, then they would just forget about being here in the Midwest.
It's related to perceived risk. So they perceive a company at this point coming up in Illinois as slightly more risky, just because they're not as familiar with our market as they are with the coasts. So I'm not saying that risk is justified, but it's a perceived risk that just because we are not a historic hotbed like Cambridge and San Francisco and San Diego are, that our perceived risk is slightly higher because it's more of an unproven ecosystem at this point. So, and so we will have a disproportional cut in venture capital investment as opposed to the coasts, which are seen as more stable kind of markets because it is more well known. So,
could you just help our listeners understand how old is our life sciences ecosystem, and how old is the life sciences ecosystem on the coast? Just so approximately.
Yeah, so we're talking about our startup ecosystem.
Right.
So our startup ecosystem really has really only been getting engaged in the past 10 years. And that's where we're starting to see the growth of the number of startup companies and the success of those companies out of our universities here. The coasts, they've been traditional hotbeds for a large number of years. It's just where venture capital and research kind of aligned to get created. So we in Illinois on the startup scene are probably 10 to 15 years behind what's been happening on the coasts. But what we've seen over these past 5 years is just a very rapid increase in catching up to those numbers. So.
The KFF Health Tracking Poll in June 2021 found that overall, nearly 9 in 10, 88% favor allowing the federal government to negotiate for lower prices on medications, including 3/4, 77% of Republicans, 9 in 10 independents, 89%, and 96% of Democrats. And while majorities of the public continue favoring this proposal, after hearing that people and the federal government could save money on their prescription drugs if this policy were implemented, majorities oppose this policy proposal when the public hears argument made by pharmaceutical companies that it could lead to less research and development for new drugs, or that access to newer prescriptions could be limited. Could you tell me who funded the KFF Health Tracking Poll?
The Kaiser Family Foundation is KFF. Kaiser Family Foundation is a nonprofit organization that's focused on national health issues, as well as the US's role in global health policy. They really develop their own policy analysis. Their endowment, they have their own endowment, and from external funds, they mostly raise from foundation, state, and local health departments. So they list their their funders on their website, but it is a number of states. It's like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So they are truly an independent research organization that partners with media on these polls. So it is a completely independent voice on this. So.
Vital transformations indicated that proposals like HR3 will use the average of pricing in other countries to control US drug prices and eliminate nearly 200,000 biopharmaceutical industry jobs and nearly 1 million jobs across the economy. How is it that the average pricing of drugs in other countries does not detrimentally affect their employment numbers, but affects US employment numbers?
So first of all, I mean, the employment of the industry is in the US as opposed to other countries. So this is where the industry is located. US is also a major market for healthcare in the world. Other countries, as I discussed before, their healthcare plan offerings are not as robust as it is in the US. So you don't get access to a lot of the drugs that you get access to in the US. And that's why we have a lot of people that come to the US to get access to drugs. They'll come in for medical procedures or to get different kind of drugs. And that's just the kind of way that the system has been set up here. And it works because it does provide competition within the industry. You can select healthcare plans based on what your needs are. And those healthcare plans provide access to health systems based on kind of what you pay into them. So I think it's, what we've seen actually with Medicare is that since it's been implemented, Part D costs are actually 40% lower than what they estimated it was going to be when they created this Medicare market system that we have. And so it's actually operating better than it was previously thought it was going to be. So pegging our price, which they don't necessarily 100% know what it is, to foreign prices just doesn't work because it's not comparing apples to apples. And as you pointed out with the Kaiser Family Foundation, patients really want access to medication,
So what you're saying is that the average in, let's say, Europe is based on a small number of drugs and not based on the wide array of drugs that are available in the US.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. A caller earlier learned that we were going to be interviewing you. So he also asked this, federal funding in HR3 funds raw science, and then but what HR3 without HR3, then private funding for profit funding private funding would replace the government funding. Do you have any position on that? Is that what he's talking about? Is there raw science of federal funding now, and if HR3 is not implemented, then would the private funding, private for-profit funding replace the current raw funding from the federal government?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out the exact question he was asking. So I'll answer this in two different ways. Okay. So HR3, which we're going to call Build Back Better program, that was passed by the House, that's really to pay for the infrastructure plan. So when we're talking about the government leveraging excise tax to force companies to negotiate, so price setting of pharmaceuticals, the savings that they're expecting to get from that is not going to patients. It's going to pay for the infrastructure plan. And so when they build out the infrastructure plan, they needed savings of 700 billion coming from the pharmaceutical industry to help pay for that plan. So that's important to point out for people. If you're thinking you're going to get a price savings from this supposed negotiation, that's going to pay for something else. That it's going to pay for bridges and streets and water, which is all really important, but it's not cost savings for patients. When we're talking about government investment in research is critical, and it's something that's supported by industry across the board. Government provides investment into basic science research. That basic science research sometimes leads to new drugs or it leads to new products. But that's the kind of investment that only a country can make into research because it's focused on the pure scientific pursuit of understanding something. When you look at a drug that comes to market, that 2.6 billion, industry spends 5 times the national investment in science. So if the US is investing in NIH or National Science Foundation, industry ends up paying 5 times that amount to bring the drug to market. And so our investment is 5 times what the national investment is in scientific research. Private companies do that. And that's primarily the cost. Basic research may identify that that a compound may have a specific reaction that could be beneficial. Industry licenses that, so they pay a license, they pay a fee to the university to utilize that, and then they invest that $2.6 billion per item to bring it to market. And so the way it works now is good because industry, sometimes does utilize basic research. I think it's utilized in less than 10% of drugs coming to market, but it's really important piece of understanding how things work. But when you look at where the cost falls to bring a drug to market, it's on industry. Industry, our companies take on the risk of bringing that to market, and only 12% of them making it to patients. And they pay the price of the $2.6 billion to do that. So that's why we see private investment of 5 times the US investment in research. So
That's $2.6 billion per drug, is what you're saying, by private industry.
$2.6 billion per drug by private, yeah, $2.6 billion. Yeah, so.
Is there any, if HR 3 is not passed, then does that affect the current funds for the federal funding for research then? I think that's what the listener was concerned about. If it does pass, or if it does not pass, how does HR 3, how does that affect the current federal funding for research?
So currently the bill, the way they have it set up, is paying for the infrastructure plan. It's not paying for scientific research right now.
Okay.
I think originally they were looking at leveraging some of those funds to increase scientific research, but for the most part, the US has been relatively flat or slightly increasing our basic research investment, which industry thinks should be higher. And we agree with members of Congress that push for that. But HR 3, or Build Back Better, is not the funder of that increase. It's the funder of the infrastructure plan, which is focused on roads and bridges and expansion of clean energy use. So
okay, so their HR 3, in other words, does not affect the current federal funding for research at all. And and what you're saying is that there's not that much federal funding for research, or there is, but not that much. There isn't any federal funding for research in HR 3, Build Back Better.
So yeah, so I'm saying that the US that Build Back Better and HR 3 is not being leveraged to increase our federal funding for scientific research, that was already existing, that we are already making that investment. Okay. And then the point I was trying to make is that, and that we've heard it, is that, if you originally they were talking about pulling some of those funds and doing it for scientific research, and that would drive down the cost of drugs, but that's not the case, because the cost of drugs is actually invested in by private industry to bring it to market. That investment into basic science does not actually reduce the cost. The cost is incurred by the pharmaceutical companies who pay 5 times the amount the US invests into science. So
Okay, 5 times the 5 times the US government investment in science is what you're saying.
yeah, private investment by our industry in R&D is 5 times what the US pays for scientific research. So
Okay, and that has been in place for how long?
it's been in place for at least the past 10 years. I'd have to look and see when we started talking about it, but it's always been the case that in the industry assumes the risk and makes the investment to bring the drugs to market, and it's bringing the drugs to market that establishes what that cost is. So
right. Do you happen to know that prior to this the 10 years, who was paying more, private industry or the government, in relations to the current equation?
I would say industry's always been the main funder. I mean, government is never really focused on the application of science to bring a drug to market for the most part. US
Of course.
is focused on basic science, which is critical. So I mean, industry is the one that always invests in bringing a drug to market, and that's the piece that accounts for the cost of a drug. So.
And you're saying that the U.S. investment in research is doesn't bring a drug to market. However, that research into science does contribute some way to the to how a drug is gets that, well, how it gets into private research. Whatever research money that the U.S. Invests in research does affect a drug somehow, or are you saying that U.S. investment in science does not affect drug research at all?
I'm saying that the US investment is focused on basic science, which advances scientific knowledge.
Okay.
And so sometimes that does correlate directly into identifying something that is, acquired or purchased by a drug company and taken to market. But a lot of times it doesn't. So a lot of the drugs on market do not come from federal funding at all. Only a portion of them, or a small portion of them, do. And they, so. But the cost exists on the commercialization of that research technology. So.
Okay, so let's clarify again the status of HR 3. If the Build Back Better plan, if the Build Back, if that is implemented, how does that affect HR 3? Build Back Better.
So Build Back Better incorporates pieces of HR 3. So essentially, Build Back Better is HR 3, the next version. So it incorporates the policies that HR 3 had. They've been negotiated, so they're slightly different, but the main kind of theme behind them is the same. Build Back Better passed out of the House of Representatives. It's currently waiting for the Senate, US Senate, to pick it up and kind of go through the Senate's process. Right now, it all depends on what the Senate does, but it may not happen this year. But it currently resides and is waiting for the Senate to start to look at it. So.
Okay, and also the current version of HR 3, does that affect us at all right now, or is that also just a proposed HR current version, a proposed current version, or is it in effect already?
It's not in effect. So it won't be in effect until Senate passes it and the president signs it. So none of the policies that are currently being negotiated are in effect, and they won't be in effect until it becomes law. And so I think we're going to continue to see kind of negotiations around it. We've seen kind of the policies in HR 3 were negotiated because they didn't have consensus on it, and so they were negotiated and then included in the Build Back Better program. And we continue to look for areas where we think there can be an improvement in that bill and to reduce impact on our local community. So,
who are the major supporters of HR3? Which legislators?
so when you were looking at HR3 and the negotiations between it, it was primarily between liberal and moderate Democrats. And so more liberal Democrats wanted kind of harsher terms in it. More moderate Democrats wanted wanted to negotiate it to have little less impact on industry, on innovation. And so those were the two kind of main groups that were kind of looking at it. Republicans also didn't support HR3 because a lot of the provisions in there they didn't agree with. But I think it's when you looked at the negotiations that were happening, it was primarily on the Democratic side. So they're trying to come to the consensus. So.
Okay, before we go into the WZRD community assessment, were you able to find that per square feet of the pricing of wet lab space in Chicago in this area versus the coast?
Well, I don't know what our current pricing is going to be. So historically, our pricing, and this is from 2019, if you're looking on the coast, you're going to be paying average asking rent of over, let's say, $80 to $85 per square foot. And these numbers are a little bit old. And that's in Boston, Cambridge. In Chicago at that time, it was about $30 a square foot. So that number's going to go up a little bit. But it's going to be about 50%. So you're going to be looking at a large discount of what you would be paying on the coast for the same class of space here in Chicago. So,
in other words, the price goes up because both the coast will go up, and then here will go up as well. But the spread, the comparison will be about the same. The difference, you're saying?
The difference will be slightly less, but it will be, I would say, around 50%. Yeah, is what we've heard. So 50%.
50%.
Yeah, it's a saving. Yeah, it would be 50% less, and that's why we saw companies start to move their R&D labs here to Chicago. So.
Right. Okay, let's do a WZRD community assessment with you. WZRD Chicago, being a nonprofit radio station, must be responsible to the community we serve. WZRD is mandated to file quarterly issues with the FCC on non-entertainment community-focused programming. We like to assess the community for these quarterly issue topics with 3 questions. First, what is most important to you? It doesn't have to concern iBIO, but it could, whatever is most important to you. John Conrad.
What's most important to me is kind of addressing this issue of the extremities that we're starting to see in our politics and even in our news media. And so fact-based, nonpartisan reporting is really important to us. We're scientific organizations. We believe in following where the science leads. And I think the same is true for reporting. And for our policymakers is they need to follow the science. They need to legislate on the science, and reporting needs to report on behalf of the science and be kind of impartial, which is something that I fully believe in and support. So.
Second, what long-term problem must we address?
I see this long-term problem, just the, and it's related because I think it's what drives what's happening in DC is just this continued divide within our nation. And so I think that's a long-term problem, this growing inequality that we have, and this growing kind of separation that we seem to see. We're getting farther and farther apart. I think that has to get addressed. So.
Are you talking about the political divide, or are you talking about the like the 1% and the rest of us divide?
I was talking about the political divide, I would say, because I think that helps drive, it's driving that overall kind of issue. So I think when you get to the heart of it, it's this ideological political divide that is causing a lot of kind of problems. So.
Okay. And finally, what problem must be addressed now?
Right now, we have to address that we currently have a bill, Build Back Better bill, that is going to be taken up by the Senate, that is going to disproportionately impact innovation, healthcare innovation in our country. It's going to hurt patients, it's going to hurt jobs, and I think that, you know, as we're looking to reducing the cost of drugs that patients pay at the pharmacy counter, that a more balanced and holistic approach of bringing together the different pieces of the ecosystem needs to be taken up, as opposed to just focusing on what polls well, and vilifying an industry to pass legislation to make a political party look good. So that's the immediate problem that needs to get resolved right now. So.
So is there still a chance that what you're addressing now can still be addressed, and there might be a compromise and middle ground found in Build Back Better before you know, the Senate takes it up, or after the Senate takes it up in reconciliation? So are your supporters still working to address the issues that you have brought up?
We are still working to address the kind of issues and concerns that we have, and we're hopeful that those concerns will be heard. So, because it is still possible to continue to make changes that will provide benefit to patients, but also won't hurt innovation. So.
Well, thank you so much, John Conrad, President and CEO of the Illinois Biotechnology Innovation Organization, iBIO, in Chicago. It's all in Chicago, or is there another iBIO somewhere else?
So yeah, we're just in Chicago. So there's another group called iBIO that's not related to us. It's not our company. So.
Okay, so that's why you have to distinguish in Chicago.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for a very informative interview, and best of luck to you. And thank you so much. Keep safe.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye.